Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of video games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is the high-flying, quick-shooting, and wrist-destroying series revival from the man responsible for Super Smash Bros. 2012's Kid Icarus Uprising.
Following that is 2014's Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair, the pink blood-splattered high school battle royale murder mystery visual novel, now taking place on the tropical Jabberwock Island. It's E3 time! Yay! As of this recording, we don't know what's going to happen with Nintendo today as it comes out on Tuesday, June 11th, so Smash? Smash character? Smash DLC? I don't know. Keep an eye on that for Smasher pieces also, coming out from Anonymous Dinosaur. Joe, how are you doing? You're at E3.
Yeah, at the time that this episode is airing, I'm actually there in LA, probably, I think, sitting in Sega's booth at this point. I actually volunteered to do an interview with a Japanese director. I was basically told right after that, all right, here's a website with all of the Japanese business card etiquette, so study up. And I was like, oh, what did I do? What did I just volunteer for?
Well, it certainly sounds busy, and I'm sure you'll have a great time. But it's definitely a busy time, exciting time for the industry. But we're here to talk about soundtracks from games from a couple of years ago, and I don't think there's really a theme this week, except that your game, because it's involving Masahiro Sakurai, likes to get a whole all-star team of composers together with this game, and one of those is the composer from my game. So it'll be a fun little segue halfway through the show, but I'm interested to learn more about Kid Icarus Uprising.
Yeah, and that wasn't planned, by the way, for those listening. We both found that out on accident while researching these games.
Somehow there's always a connection. It somehow seems to work out, and it's just part of the fun of the show.
It's fate. So, let's talk about Kid Icarus Uprising, but to talk about Kid Icarus Uprising, we've got to go back to 1986, when a Famicom/NES game came out called Kid Icarus, or in Japan, Light Mythology Palutena's Mirror. I've played it. It sucks. It is a bad game.
Yeah.
It is. We played it for Smasher pieces, and it's, I don't recommend it. Then, in 1991, a sequel came out on the Game Boy called Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters. There is no Japanese name for this game because it didn't come out in Japan. This was a Western exclusive.
I did not know that. I knew the game existed, but I did not know that really was a thing.
Yep, it was developed by a Japanese team, but never released in Japan. Nintendo has all but forgotten that this game exists. There's not even any spirits from it in Smash. Like, imagine all of the obscure stuff in Smash as spirits. Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters is absolutely nowhere in there. And then Kid Icarus disappeared for like a decade, or if you were in Japan, for 2 decades. The main character of Kid Icarus only really existed at that point in like small little cameos in stuff like WarioWare microgames, or he had a trophy in Super Smash Bros. Melee. And then in 2006, Pit, the main character, was announced for Super Smash Bros. Brawl as a newcomer. He was he was the second newcomer shown off. The 3 at launch, if I remember correctly, when I went to watch was Wario shown off in the first trailer?
Yes, he was. Sure. Yep.
He was, yeah.
He had the big old fart at the end.
So there were 4 newcomers in that trailer. There was Meta Knight, Pit, Wario, and Snake.
And Zero Suit Samus.
Zero Suit Samus was also shown in that trailer. Man, there was a lot shown in that trailer.
Yeah,
that was a while ago.
Mm-hmm.
He had gotten a full redesign with this cool weapon that was a bow made of two blades that he could split and kind of things. It was really cool. And that's where I first heard about Kid Icarus, because I had never heard of that game before. So that's cool. His introduction into Smash made a lot of people wonder, like, well, does that mean that a revival might be coming? Are we going to get a new Kid Icarus game? And of course, studios had pitched Kid Icarus games to Nintendo before. I don't remember what studio it was. I really should have.
Factor 5, I think.
Factor 5.
Yes.
No, you're right. There's an Unseen 64 episode on that game. Nintendo turned them down, I believe, because they didn't want to revive Kid Icarus unless somebody was going to do something different with it. But the point is, people were hoping for a revival, but one hadn't happened yet. It went unanswered for 4 years after Brawl's announcement and release. But then in 2010, Nintendo officially announced that Kid Icarus Uprising was in development, or as it's called in Japan, New Light Mythology Palutena's Mirror, which it's good to know that it's not just Nintendo of America that's really bad at naming everything they make.
Basically like New Kid Icarus.
Like, come on, guys, try a little bit harder than that. And it was being helmed by the creator of Kirby and Super Smash Bros., Masahiro Sakurai. The game was released in 2012, March 2012 specifically. Unlike the previous two titles in the series, it is not a 2D platformer. It is instead a third-person shooter with two different types of gameplay, one that's on rails and the other that is ground-based, more traditional third-person shooter gameplay. The story actually takes place 25 years after the original Kid Icarus. This game also happens to completely ignore that myths and monsters ever happened.
Yeah, makes sense.
There is nothing from that game in Uprising whatsoever. But it takes place 25 years after the original game, where Pit and Palutena have returned, and they have to stop Medusa, the queen of the underworld, from destroying humanity, but soon find out that there's a different villain pulling the strings in the background, and then also like 6 other things happen. This would be the point where I say, Peter, have you played Kid Icarus Uprising?
No, because we're going to talk about the controls, and that was my breaking point.
Yeah, that's fair.
It's a game I would love to go back and revisit, because there is all of that Sakurai charm with the writing, and you do have great performances and writing, and the game looks gorgeous and fun, but it's a twin-stick shooter. Not really, essentially, but it needs the 2 analog sticks, really, is what I mean. But it's meant for a time when there wasn't the solution, and then they added the right nub on the 3DS, or you had the stand. It came with its own separate hardware of the stand, and it just never worked for me. I have it. I own it. I have the stand. I just don't have experience with this game. I like the soundtrack, though, a lot.
So it should be noted when he mentions the controls, this game is infamous for having one of the most painful control methods ever. So, if you've never seen a 3DS, in the video version, I have one right here.
All right.
There's this slide pad right here. This controls Pit's movement.
Whether you're in the air, on the ground, whatever.
Yeah. While putting your stylus on the touchscreen on the bottom here is how you control where Pit's weapons are aiming. It works. It's a very, very responsive and well put together control scheme, but after long periods of play, and by long I mean like an hour, you will actually start to do damage to your wrists. It is not a comfortable control scheme in any way, shape, or form, and this is unfortunate. It's one of the reasons why people have wanted the game to be ported elsewhere, which we'll get to in a bit.
And I never understood why there wasn't an update, that when they did come out with the new 3DS and it had that right stick of a nub, that would have solved everything. Just give it a patch, but No.
So apparently they do have a reason for it, but I think it's really stupid. So we'll get to that in a little bit as well. But they have provided a reason. It's dumb and doesn't make sense to me, but whatever. So, right after development on Super Smash Bros. Brawl had wrapped up in 2008, Sakurai actually went and had dinner with Satoru Iwata, who at the time was the president of Nintendo. What Iwata wanted was for Sakurai to make a launch title for the then still in development Nintendo 3DS, making Sakurai the first external staff member to even know that the 3DS existed, which really shows how much Iwata trusted Sakurai.
And there's just multiple stories of that, especially with Smash. Like, oh, I'm going to trust that Sakurai will make this next game, so I'll announce it before I even talk to him. Like, there's a pretty good trust between the two.
Mm-hmm. Sakurai was really worried about doing this project because after Brawl's completion, the team at Sora Ltd, which is the studio that Sakurai was working for, had been considerably downsized because most of their staff during Brawl was either provided by Nintendo or the work was done by outsourced other companies. He did accept this project. He wanted to make a launch title for the 3DS, and he decided very early that what he wanted to do was he wanted to do a third-person shooter. And originally, it was going to be an original IP. Both of these are extremely risky because A, third-person shooters in general, not very popular in Japan. I think shooters in general are not super popular over there. And two, a new IP would make it an even harder sell. A new IP in a genre that's not very popular on a system that had just launched. That would have been a hard sell. But eventually, Iwata convinced him that no, you should probably use like a Nintendo IP, like one we've already established. And so he looked around and realized that a lot of Smash fans had noted that a lot of the characters in Brawl and in Smash in general hadn't really had a game in a while. That would include Captain Falcon. I would assume that included the Ice Climbers, which may they never get a game again. And of course, included Pit. So he looked at all those, and at the time, I guess it also included Star Fox.
Yeah, you're right.
That was one of the things that it was originally being looked at. He was looking at Star Fox, the obvious choice if you're looking at a third-person shooter, because Star Fox is a third-person shooter.
Yeah, it would have gone great with the 3D, absolutely.
Yeah, so he thought about that, but then he landed on using Kid Icarus, simply because of his involvement in bringing Pit into Smash. He was given approval to start development on the game in 2008, but there were no 3DS dev kits in 2008. So, after plans were finalized in 2009, he established Project Sora, which was the studio that made Uprising, obviously, as you can probably gather. They were created specifically to make Kid Icarus Uprising, and in fact disbanded after making Kid Icarus Uprising. That made Kid Icarus Uprising the first 3DS game to enter production at all.
It was the first 3DS game that was shown at all, yeah.
Yeah. But there were still no dev kits for the 3DS. So they started developing on Wii hardware and also on PCs, which caused a couple of problems when the 3DS dev kits came out and weren't quite as powerful as they were expecting. So multiple features had to go into heavy revisions. And I believe early in development, there were also supposed to be 3 more chapters to the game, and those got cut.
Oof.
While the original Kid Icarus is known for its high difficulty, side note here, the beginning of Kid Icarus is really hard. Because it's bad. Once you pass the halfway point once you get out of the underworld, Kid Icarus actually becomes a painfully easy game to the point where it's now bad and also boring. But the beginning of the game is what everybody remembers, because that's as far as most people get. So, since it was known for that, Sakurai decided that they wanted to tone down the difficulty to make it so that anybody can play it, which is a policy that I am very behind. I like that a lot. And that introduced the Fiend's Cauldron mechanic, which is one of Kid Icarus's most noteworthy mechanics in general. You can basically feed this cauldron more hearts, which is the currency of the game, before a level starts. And the more you pay in, the harder the game will be, the harder the level you're about to play will be, and the more rewards you will get. So if you're looking for a super hard challenge, just load that baby up with hearts. If you're looking for pretty easy, throw in 2 or 3. This mechanic was actually also implemented in both of the following Smash Brothers.
Yep.
And I think it works rather well.
I was going to say, it sure sounds like a Sakurai kind of feature.
Yeah, it's in my opinion, one of the best ways to handle difficulty that any modern game has done. And right now we're in this weird transition period where people want really challenging games, but also other people want games that humans can play. And finding out how to strike the balance between the two is really difficult. And I think this game pulls it off really well. And according to them, going back to the control scheme, it was made to be simple.
Well.
And I don't think they know what simple means. Apparently, the controls were really hard for the devs to get working correctly. And they just wanted to take full advantage of the 3DS's capabilities to the point where, according to them, the reason there is no support for the Circle Pad Pro, which was announced very late into Kid Icarus Uprising's development cycle, and the reason why it was not updated to work with that nub on the new 3DS is because there's no room to do so. Because the game is so full already.
I'm sorry?
And I consider that a dumb excuse. There's no room in the game to add those things. Is basically the way I took it.
No, you just didn't want to.
Yeah, I think that's 100% the case. And that's also something Sakurai has said when people say like, hey, can we get Kid Icarus Uprising on the Switch maybe, where there are 2 analog sticks?
Yeah, it'd be perfect.
It'd be perfect for the Switch. Sakurai has straight up said, no, probably not. And his reason there is we worked really hard to get it to work on the 3DS, and I think it would be a bad idea to put it anywhere else, which again is a dumb excuse.
Sounds like he's tripping and falling over himself.
I guess. It's really weird, the amount of dancing around okay, we know we gave it a really awkward control scheme that happens with this game, because other than the control scheme, the game is fantastic. It's possibly one of the best games on the 3DS. Unfortunately, the biggest drawback to the control scheme isn't even that it hurts to play. It's that if you're left-handed, you can't play the game at all.
Yep. Also a problem. This is why dual analog sticks are pretty okay, because everyone can play those regardless of which dominant hand you are.
Yeah, so it's just the control scheme is a very unfortunate blight on what is otherwise a really, really good game. Outside of the controls and the unfortunate situation that they are in, Sakurai wrote the entire script by himself because he wanted to make sure it all flowed together in a consistent manner. And he also wanted to keep the game's Greek mythology inspirations while not mirroring the actual myths that it's based on, because, and I found this very interesting, he specifically did not want it to go in the same direction as God of War. Like, he name-dropped God of War.
And of course, God of War at the time was, 2012 was Ascension. Where's 2013? Getting close to that point where, like, they're really beating over the same sort of game. I mean, 2010 was God of War 3. That was when they're announcing the game. So yeah, it's certainly something to consider.
Mm-hmm. Many notable changes were also made to past characters, especially Palutena, who went from being a damsel in distress character in the first 2 games to being Pitt's boss and partner throughout the entire game. She's the one that's giving Pitt his powers. She's basically his point of contact and the person he's talking to for most of the levels. And their dynamic is apparently based on traditional Japanese comedy duos, and it works really well. Those two have some great writing and chemistry behind them. Being that Palutena is a terrible, horrible person, and Pitt is an idiot. Other characters were also introduced, such as Hades, who was the actual surprise antagonist of the game. Dark Pitt is turned into a character instead of just a recolor in Smash. And, of course, the most notable addition to the series is the goddess of nature, Viridi, voiced by Hynden Walsh.
Oh, yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Oh, yeah. She's one of the best characters.
For those that don't know, that's Starfire. Teen
Starfire
Titans.
and Princess Bubblegum would be the two that she is most known for.
Mm-hmm.
The game was officially announced at E3 in 2010, alongside the 3DS, which you were there, weren't you?
I was there. It was a really cool moment. I'll never forget it. In fact, what I will remember the most, actually, is looking and be like, what is this? And then I look and turn around at the teleprompter, and it said, roll like Kid Icarus. And I'm just like, what?
Oh, that's beautiful. As previously mentioned, it was supposed to be a launch title for the 3DS, which came out in 2011. If you've been paying attention, Kid Icarus Uprising came out in 2012.
It really needed that launch title.
It really, really needed that launch title, and it's a very unfortunate, because, we both had a 3DS at launch.
Oh, yeah.
Them were dark times.
I mean, what did you get at launch for 3DS?
I got Super Street Fighter 4 and Nintendogs. I don't own either of those games anymore.
I got those too. I got the Golden Retriever version specifically of Nintendogs.
I think I did too? No, wait, what were the versions?
There was French Bulldog, there was Golden Retriever, and there was one more. There may have been a cat version, because it was Nintendogs plus cats.
Well, I think all of them were Nintendogs plus cats.
Yes, yeah, but I don't know. Yeah, blanking on that one, because it was a very, very weak launch lineup. So yeah, something like Kid Icarus would have been fantastic there.
One of the weakest launch lineups that has ever been in games. Mm-hmm. It was abysmal. And then they turned it around super hard, and I think Kid Icarus finally coming out was a big part of that.
Yeah, it was that. It was a price drop. They had the ambassador program for those that had bought in early. Mm-hmm. We're still waiting on GBA games to come to something like a Nintendo Switch.
I would enjoy that. Anything, maybe put more than just NES games. I'd appreciate that. Please, put from a good system. I'd like that.
E3. It's happening today at launch.
But, man, if we call that's like pointing at the stands, baby.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be at Super Nintendo, but let's be real.
So it got delayed to the following year. And also, in terms of localization, a lot of changes had to be made because a lot of Pitt and Palutena's sort of stuff was based on conversational nuance, specifically in Japanese, which does not work in English because English is a much different language. And remember kids, that's what localization means. It's not straight translations because sometimes a straight translation won't work.
But censorship.
Oh boy.
Yeah,
People need to learn the difference between the two. They really do.
Yeah.
And Sakurai apparently gave the Treehouse a ton of freedom with the game's English script, and they knocked it out of the park. It's fantastic. To promote the game's release, Nintendo actually commissioned 3 animation studios to produce anime shorts taking place in the game's world. Studio 4 degrees Celsius, 4 degrees C. I'm not familiar with this studio specifically, but they produced Medusa's Revenge.
I've actually heard of that studio, but I've always thought of it as 4C, huh?
4C? It might be 4C. That's the only one on the list that I've never heard of. Shaft produced the 2-part Palutena's Revolting Dinner. And Production IG produced the 3-part Thanatos Rising. I believe these were all made available on the 3DS eShop as like free downloads.
Yeah, that was at a time where they're doing like trailers in 3D or whatever. Hey, Thanatos, it's tied back to Persona 3 from last week, so there you go.
Yeah, there you go. I believe they also aired on TV in Japan, but obviously they didn't do that here. The game was overall well received, with most of the criticism, again, being based on the control scheme that was not only difficult to use, but could potentially cause actual damage to a player's hands and wrists if the game was played for long periods of time, including, as it is generally believed, hurt Sakurai's wrists to the point where he has to use a trackball to play Smash now. Which that should have been the first red flag, but whatever. Nevertheless, by 2013, the game had sold over 1 million copies, and at that time was the 10th best-selling game on the 3DS. I don't know where it ranks now. I couldn't find any numbers. I'm sure if I dug a lot harder than I did for that specific piece of information, I would. But I imagine it's still pretty high up there when it comes to sales numbers on the 3DS.
Yeah, I would imagine so. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's one of those games that it's like it's a great game. It's so well regarded, but it's that control scheme that really hinders it.
Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, its music is fantastic, and it was done by a stacked team. But for now, we're going to focus on the guy with top billing, which is saying something with the group of people that we'll get to after this. Motoi Sakuraba. So Motoi Sakuraba was born on August 5th, 1965 in the Akita Prefecture of Japan, and attended Meiji University in the 80s, where he decided that composition and music were going to be his focuses in life, and even formed a progressive rock band in 1984 called Clashed Ice, alongside a drummer, Genta Kudo. But after they graduated, they somehow managed to catch the attention of a music producer from Made in Japan Records and wound up with a record deal, as well as wound up recruiting a bassist. During this time, the band's name was changed from Clashed Ice to Deja Vu. Sadly, not the initial D song.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Deja vu, I just been in this place before. Higher on the street and the noise.
They released one studio album in 1988. It is called Baroque in the Future, but then broke up the following year in 1989. Later that year, Sakuraba found himself working at a studio called Wolf Team, which is the best name for a studio I've ever heard in my life.
And every morning they go, ho ho!
Here's hoping. I hope so bad. They're Japanese though, so probably not. And while he was at that company, he found himself starting to build quite the reputation for his work, both inside the company and outside of the company. In 1994, a former member of Wolf Team left the studio to join Camelot, who are famous for making the Mario Tennis, Mario Golf, Golden Sun, all that stuff. They were the creators of Waluigi, which I always thought they were English for some reason, but they're not. That is a Japanese studio, and I don't know where I got the idea that they were European.
Huh. I had the same impression.
So that's interesting. But now, Camelot is a Japanese studio. Then in 1995, Wolf Team came out with a game that would put them on the map. And that game was Tales of Phantasia. It would spawn a JRPG series that is still around to this day.
Yeah, and whenever I think of Motoi Sakuraba, I always think of the Tales of series.
Yeah, that also put Sakuraba much higher on the map as well because of his work with Phantasia. That same year, some members of Wolf Team once again broke off of the studio and founded Tri-Ace, with financial backing from Enix. So this would have been before that merger created the company we know today. And that's a thing you're going to see a lot in this story, by the way, is that Sakuraba's story seems to be a lot about knowing the right people at the right time and just having those connections elsewhere that's going to get you a lot of work. This is the most I've seen it in any of our stories, despite the fact that the video game industry is an industry that thrives on that. But he has composed for nearly all of Tri-Ace's games, except for a few exceptions. The same scenario happened once again when former member of Wolf Team and Tri-Ace broke off to form the development studio Tri-Crescendo, and Sakuraba found himself regularly brought in to compose for their games as well. He currently works on just about everything he possibly can.
Dude's busy.
Yeah. Even outside of video games, he's produced several solo albums and even does live performances of his music, including one that was listed specifically on Wikipedia alongside the band of Nobuo Uematsu, the Earthbound Papas. And he is a big fan of modern takes on the Baroque style, often fusing it with his own brand of Japanese rock, according to him. So he's got a long discography. So he has composed for the entire Tales franchise, which again, that's what he's most famous for. He has composed for the entire Star Ocean franchise, did the music for Hot Shots Golf, which is called Everybody's Golf in Japan, which got really confusing to me when I remembered that there is a PS4 game called Everybody's Golf that is apparently completely unrelated.
Interesting.
Yeah, I figured it was like a revival or something. As far as I can tell, it has nothing to do with that game.
Wow. I would have thought it was a revival for sure.
He has composed for the entire Mario Golf and Tennis franchises. He's done Valkyrie Profile 1 and 2. The Golden Sun franchise, which is 3 games, even though I thought it was 2 until just recently. The entire Baten Kaitos series. He worked on Super Smash Bros. Brawl, where he did remixes of the Melee menu theme, Gourmet Race, Jungle Level version 2, a Mario Tennis and Golf medley, a remix of the Ruby and Sapphire Victory Road theme from Pokemon, the airship theme from Mario 3, the battle scene / final boss from Golden Sun, and the Battlefield and Final Destination themes.
Well, it's interesting that he got a crack at some of his own previous work, so yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And then he also came back to work on Super Smash Bros. For Wii U and 3DS, doing the remixes of the Area 6 / Missile Slipstream theme from Star Fox, Battle Team Flare from Pokemon X and Y, and the Valedictory Elegy, again from one of his old games, Baten Kaitos. He did the music for Eternal Sonata, which I only know what that game is because of Loading Ready Run, because it is infamous for being one of the most horribly paced JRPGs ever in terms of cutscenes.
And it's a weird dub.
Yeah, it sure is.
Mm-hmm.
He has also composed for the entire Dark Souls franchise, including being the sole composer for Dark Souls 1, something I did not know until doing this research.
Yeah, if you mention that to me, it's like, oh, yeah, that does sound about right. But this is where everyone goes, why did you put that first? That's clearly the most important thing.
That is probably one of the biggest games he's done on this list, in terms of an international, outside of Smash, in terms of an international audience. He also was on the team for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, but I couldn't actually find, without having to go into my own music library, which I wasn't exactly able to do at this time. He worked on Ultimate, but I couldn't find exactly what songs he did.
So yeah, he's an all-star over there in Japan as far as video game music composition, a lot of JRPGs, and he's only just a name in the list of all-stars that it seems that worked on this soundtrack for Kid Icarus Uprising.
Oh yeah, like I said, this game had a stacked team of composers from, again, Motoi Sakuraba to Yuzo Koshiro, Masafumi Takada, Noriyuki Iwadare, famous for Ace Attorney.
Yep, the later Ace Attorney games.
Takahiro Nishi, Yasunori Mitsuda, with assistance from Natsumi Kameoka, who I believe was Mitsuda's assistant.
Yasunori Mitsuda, Chrono Trigger. You got the guy from Chrono Trigger to work on this soundtrack.
There are so many and apparently they were specifically chosen because they were the ones they had contributed the most to the soundtrack of Brawl.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, Sakurai just pulled in all of these killers. Like, I had no idea that all of the, like, Yuzo Koshiro, man!
ActRaiser.
Like, what? What? The music for the air sections are especially cool because the air sections are a set length. And so the songs were able to be a set length and also were able to be written specifically to match up with dialogue or what's happening on screen.
That's super cool. Yeah.
Really, really cool. Overall, the soundtrack is a mix of live orchestration and synthesizers, and each element of the songs, I found this very weird. Each element was recorded separately, live instruments, synthesizers, all that, and then mixed together so that it could be adjusted for time so that it would match up with said events.
Yeah, be able to be adjusted on the fly. Things can change in development, but you don't want to go back to the full drawing board. Yeah, that makes sense, but that is interesting for sure.
According to Mitsuda, the recording of the live instruments took 7 full sessions. I assume that means full day sessions. And he believes that this made it one of the biggest musical productions in the industry at the time, which he's probably correct. That's probably been blown out of the water by games since, but at the time, yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, if you're talking about original music, probably, I mean, you got to point back to Smash when you're talking about all the remixes and whatnot. That surely is the biggest undertaking, but yeah, if you're talking about original music composed with all those different efforts, that's a huge, huge undertaking.
And this was slightly before orchestration would become this huge thing, because I think Galaxy is what launched that.
That was 2007, yeah.
In a lot of ways, if I remember correctly. There might have been other games that had big live orchestrated soundtracks before then, but the first one that I can think of is Galaxy.
At least on Nintendo's end, yeah.
In the end, Mitsuda estimates that around 150 people had their hands in the creation of Uprising's soundtrack.
Yeah, it shows. It shows. Great songs here. Looking forward to getting to hear them.
Well, let's get started then with our 5 critical tracks. The first one being Boss Fight 1. An unfortunate name, because it's the only one on the list that's just like, generic video game name. But I don't know what else they would have called it, so, whatever. It was composed by Yasunori Mitsuda, who wanted to make something. He wanted a song that was different from the boss fight themes of games around this time, because, in his opinion, too many of them were oppressive and dire. But he wanted something that was encouraging and positive. And then I guess later on he decided to throw in some really hype, because this song is hype.
It sure is. It's really exciting. You get a taste of it in the opening of the game, but to see it come back, and you're definitely thinking of when you're battling Cerberus early on in the game. Like, that's the big boss battle I think you associate with this one, but it is exciting for sure.
Oh no, it plays in every boss fight, pretty much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't doubt that, but whenever maybe it's just like the opening or the trailer for the game, like I always associate it with the Cerberus battle.
For some reason, I associate it with the Pandora fight, and I don't know why, of all of them, that's the one that comes to mind. That's also the only one that I can, like, picture clearly in my head. It's been a while since I played this game. I want to say I played it back in, like, 2014. So, it's been a couple years. It is one of the most hype boss fight themes to ever be in a game, ever. I love it. Fantastic song. The electric guitar is super hype, and then it gets into the orchestrated stuff near the end of the loop, and it's all so good.
Good one to start off the list with.
After that, we have my personal second favorite song of the game, Dark Pit. And no, not Dark Pit, not his, theme. That's a different song. Even though that song is still very good. This is a different version of that song. This one plays during the flight section of the Dark Pit chapter. So It's got the set length, it's got the stuff that matches up with what's happening on screen, and I just really like the acoustic guitar that goes in the background of this one, because the regular version of the theme doesn't have that as hard, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This was made by Motoi Sakuraba, who apparently composed it with Western gun duels in mind.
He succeeded, and it's certainly got that vibe.
I don't know why, but he sure did. Specifically trying to give it a Spanish or Latin flair, which, again, sure succeeded on that. It is probably the most famous song to come out of the game. In general, just the Dark Pit music is the one I hear about more often than anything else. And for good reason. It's a fantastic piece. And it's probably one of my favorite levels in the game.
Yeah, it's a melody that you don't forget. The drums in this clip especially just really keep the energy up. But yeah, I mean, all the different variations of his theme with that. It's not really a flamenco guitar, but it's that sort of sound.
Mm-hmm. After that, we have Wrath of the Reset Bomb. I know what you're thinking. Joe, are you just picking all the songs that are in Smash? And technically, yes, because all of my top 5 did make it into Smash, but they made it into Smash because they are fantastic songs that are very indicative of how the entire soundtrack goes.
And clearly Sakurai likes them a whole lot, so...
Yeah. Wrath of the Reset Bomb is Yuzo Koshiro's work. It is the song that plays when you are introduced to Viridi, because she is dropping her reset bombs on human towns. Basically what they do is when they hit the ground, they cause forests to overtake everything and also kill any human life within the blast radius, because Viridi hates humans, and I cannot blame her. I believe the whole thing is you go to try and stop this battle from breaking out between Hades forces and a human army, and then suddenly you just hear something akin to "Return to nature, monkeys!" And which, imagine Hinden Walsh screaming that, it's the best thing.
Yeah.
And then a reset bomb lands on a town.
Oops.
Apparently, this was only meant to be used for one level, but Sakurai liked it so much that it just became the theme of Viridi and the forces of nature.
Yeah, and it's got that memorable bit of dun 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 dun. It's one of those riffs that you associate with this song, this game. It's got an energy to it.
Yeah, it's fantastic piece. From there, we have Thundercloud Temple. This is the level where you meet the character Phosphora. I don't have a lot to say about this because there's not much to it, but it's also like a fantastic piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember it being a fun level. And Phosphora is just a fun character. She's... The one thing that sticks out to me about this level in memory still is her revealing like, oh yeah, no, this isn't my temple. What? Yeah, I just sort of came here and I've been living here for a while. You're just squatting in someone else's temple? I love her. She's great.
I feel like if I were to pick the list here, I would have picked Thunder Battle here. And I mean, it's the same melody, but it's just, more electric guitar energy. It just amps up a bit. But yeah, this one kind of goes places. It has waves. It's more dynamic. So it's a good choice.
It's certainly a weird, like, put this next to Wrath of the Reset Bomb.
Oh yeah.
It's a very weird comparison to make, but they're from the same game. And last but not least, my favorite song in the entire game, Destroyed Skyworld. This song was composed by Yuzo Koshiro and Motoi Sakuraba working together. And I think it's the best example of the set level length being used to its full effect, because it starts as this dire, intense piece as you're trying to get into Skyworld, and then when it moves into the dun 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 dun, if I remember correctly, that section is you popping out of the clouds and seeing exactly what has happened to Skyworld.
Yeah, that's super effective.
Yeah, it's this really powerful moment, and it's just this sudden drop from it being a really intense piece to this gorgeous and dramatic piece. And it's super cool. I love this song so much. I think the Smash versions, unfortunately, because they had to shorten it, don't really do it justice as much as the original piece does. Especially, I'm not a huge fan of the vocals in the Ultimate version. I still like it, but I think the original is far and above the better version. Meanwhile, on the cutting room floor, you have a couple. Hit me with those.
We gotta go with the opening, clearly. I mean, not only do I remember it because of all those E3 memories, but it brings back the original Kid Icarus theme. And I think that's really important to establish early and then be like, no, this is new Kid Icarus. We're going to do our own thing. But this is what we're hearkening back to. Composed by Yasunori Mitsuda. So again, a great quality piece. Has a little bit of that boss battle one flair in it. Just a stellar track.
And I was actually able to find a piece of trivia about that song, being that apparently Sakuraba did not know a lot about the game world, and so when they were working on this, when Mitsuda was working on this, I guess, they had to redo it a lot, because when they were finally shown footage of the game, it didn't really mesh with what they had written in the first place. So, what that means, I don't know. I don't think they've ever released the original versions. But apparently this song had to be rewritten over and over again.
I would be curious to hear what those are. The other track is Dog's Theme. And it's such a small piece that apparently barely plays in the game, but it's just a different feel. It's almost like a fiddle-like, kind of tapping on acoustic guitars. It's just a nice chill vibe, but it's composed by Masafumi Takada, and we'll have more on him in a bit. I like the song. It's just a different vibe, but it fits with the world. And then just the added element of it's the guy who we're going to be talking about soon. I wanted to include that as well. So
I'm pretty sure I know where that... I mean, why am I saying I'm pretty sure I know where that plays? I know where that plays. It's literally the only place it could be with a Name Like Dogs theme. And that part of the game is weird and also one of the most memorable just sort of moments in the game. So I would recommend looking into that. For me, I only have one thing, which is again another song that made it into Smash, which means I'm right and it's notable. Magnus's theme.
Oh yeah, definitely notable.
It was composed by Yuzo Koshiro, and Magnus is, I believe, one of the only major human characters in the entire game. He's got a Cloud Strife style giant sword, and just is really cool. He's a cool guy. And apparently, Koshiro says that he incorporated one of Hip Tanaka's original themes from the original Kid Icarus, but for the life of me, I cannot hear which song that would be. I don't hear anything like that, so maybe I'm just crazy?
I guess I'm not just familiar with the original Kid Icarus soundtrack.
I kind of am, and I still don't hear it, but sure, I believe him. He knows better than I do.
It's a really good theme, though, and I'm glad it's here.
So what will I never forget about this game? Mostly the fact that I would love for it to come out on Switch, even though it sounds like that's not a thing. And also it sounds like a sequel is not really a thing that they are planning to do anytime soon either. But also, this game is pretty much the reason why Smasterpieces exists.
Oh, okay.
Because Matt and I were talking about how, I should really play Kid Icarus Uprising again. Hey, what if we played Kid Icarus Uprising again? And somehow that transitioned into, what if we played one game for all of them? And now here I am, for better or for worse. So I think that's very interesting, and that's there. And that's the main thing I'm going to remember. I have talked for so long, I should go ahead and hit the transition so we can get to you, unless you got anything else to add about Kid Icarus.
Just real quick, I would love to play it without the control problems. If any 3DS game comes to Switch, Kid Icarus Uprising is the biggest no-brainer, but you're right. Hearing that story with those circumstances, it's good to learn about, but it just feels like that's not going to happen, and that's a shame.
Mm-hmm. So my transition. We like to highlight a fan remix of some sort, and I picked a remix of Dark Pit by the user Gommetal on YouTube, so please enjoy that.
All right, gotta love that good old Johnny Atma there on Game Metal. Nice remix. Good choice. I like it a lot. But it's time to talk about Danganronpa. Dang-ass rompers, Ron Paul, whatever you want to call it.
It has a lot of names.
Many, many people call it different things. But Danganronpa is a word that is a portmanteau. Meaning it's the just slamming two words together to make one new word. And so in this case, Danganronpa is a portmanteau of the Japanese words for bullet and refute. and it's a video game franchise that consists of 4 primary installments. You have, at least for the English name adaptations, you have Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. You have Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair. Danganronpa Another Episode, Ultra Despair Girls. And Danganronpa V3, Killing Harmony. These are the 4 main games of the series. Ultra Despair Girls is a weird spin-off that's a character action game and completely unlike any of the others. So it's kind of the red-headed stepchild in a way of this series of games, but it's a multimedia franchise as well. There are Danganronpa manga and novels that have been produced. There's an anime that's based on the Trigger Happy Havoc series of game events, but there's also Danganronpa 3, The End of Hope's Peak High School, which is an anime that if you get into this series or are a fan of this series, I would highly recommend. It has 2 arcs that take place at different times in the series canon, and kind of, I guess during airing they like alternated back and forth between these 2 arcs, but if you go on like Funimation or something like that, you can watch the series, and highly recommended for fans. Super good. But we're going to talk about Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair today, and there are a couple reasons for that. We'll get into that a little later here, but this is the second Danganronpa game, of course. And it was released as a PSP game in July 26th, 2012 in Japan as Super Danganronpa 2 Sayonara Zetsubo Gakuen, which translates out to Goodbye Despair Academy. So that's an interesting change of like Goodbye Despair, like the feeling in America, but then it's Despair Academy, the school, over in Japan. But yes, this was a PSP game in 2012. Like very late in the life cycle in Japan. And so this came to PlayStation Vita along with the first game, which was also a PSP game, came bundled together in an upscaled reload package of the first 2 Japanese games together on October 10th, 2013. And so when they discovered, maybe we can bring this series over to America, maybe they'd be interested. So keep in mind, October 10th, 2013 on Vita. The first game, Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, came to the United States, I think it was February 11th, 2014. So, I don't know, 4 or 5 months later, like 4 months, basically, and the series is now in America. And then 7 months after that comes Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair to North America on PlayStation Vita on September 2nd, 2014. So 2014 was the year of Danganronpa for the United States, where you get the first 2 games dropping 7 months apart. Like, that is wild for a new IP.
I mean, I'd say it's the year of something, if not for the fact that it was on the Vita. And I don't think I don't think anything on the Vita can have a year.
That's true. And it followed the year of Luigi, and 2014 was the year of Smash Wii U and 3DS. So yeah, I guess that's also an issue.
Rest the Vita's soul.
I do love my PlayStation Vita. Europe and Australia got the game for Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair also in September of 2014. The game is now available on PC as of April 2016 and on PS4 as of March 2017. It's developed by Spike Chunsoft and also published by Spike Chunsoft in Japan, but in the other regions, NIS America, Nippon Ichi Software America took responsibility to bring the game out as a publisher. So what is dang-ass Ron Paul's? Danganronpa is a visual novel, essentially, that features murder mystery investigations and trials. And in these trials, players need to point out contradictions about the cases. I think it's very easy to equate the gameplay to Ace Attorney, and I'm going to be making several references to Ace Attorney because that's probably the easiest thing to compare it to. Whenever I've thought of what Danganronpa is, I've always thought of Ace Attorney's gameplay mashed up with like the plot setup of a battle royale, and you have the dark theming of the Zero Escape series with just a little sprinkle of Persona's social links. So at the time when like that is essentially pitched to me, like this is everything I want. Like I need to get into the series. I did, and I love it. And I'm so happy to be talking about it with you all today. Because Danganronpa, if you've played an Ace Attorney game, it is a must, I'd say. And Joe, I'm curious. I don't think you've gotten to the Danganronpa series, but it's one where I'm going to be very light on or just completely avoid spoilers, period, because I really want you to play this series. And I want everyone out there to as well. Like, for Zero Escape and for Danganronpa, I like to, in a way, evangelize these games. And I think this is a game series you would love.
The first game's been installed on my PC through Steam for like a year. I haven't loaded it up yet.
Bro, you need to get to it. I think like that will get you hooked. And then we'll have the second one here, which just continues on it. Highly, highly recommended. The plot setup of a Danganronpa game, for those curious, I do mention that battle royale sort of style, that plot. It involves 16 high school students being placed into an environment. In this sequel, it's the tropical Jabberwock Island. No relation to the Jabberwockies. And the original game has the Hope's Peak Academy school setting. The thing about these 16 high school students is that each student is the ultimate student in a particular field or ability. So you're getting this name of a character, this very anime style look to the character, but they have an ultimate ability. So, I mean, in this game, there's the ultimate Yakuza, there's the ultimate cook, there's the ultimate nurse, there's the ultimate trainer. Like, just, there's different abilities in this sense. And it's really important to kind of piece this character that you're just meeting with that ability. It's easier than it may sound, trust me. So, in order to escape this tropical island that these students have been placed on, a student has to successfully murder one of their classmates and get away with it. So there's your battle royale upping the stakes here. I mean, it's last one surviving. And so as the player takes the role of Hajime Hinata, a boy with no memory of his special ability, the player must survive the treacherous game that is being run by the devilish bear Monokuma while investigating the murders that do occur in order to discover the truth of Jabberwock Island. So, yeah, it really ups the stakes. I mean, teens murdering each other. Woo! But because the plot is really everything with the visual novel, I'm just gonna be mum on the spoilers. I'll be able to talk around it, but it's one, I highly, highly recommend. If you have any interest based on that, highly recommend the Danganronpa series. It's also important to note that in this sense, we're going to talk about Danganronpa 2, but do know that endgame stuff in Danganronpa 2 it's necessary to play the first game. Like, this isn't one of those series where it's like, I can just start with the sequel. Like, no, you really need to know what's going on in the first game to appreciate the second. So keep that in mind if any of this interests you. So the gameplay of Danganronpa is essentially split up into two parts. There's the school life and the class trial. As the school life section goes, it's broken up further into daily life and deadly life, or essentially before and after a murder has taken place. And so in daily life, the story's progressing forward through scripted events, and you're talking to characters, you're going places. Or you can even have free time to talk to your classmates. And really, honestly, this is where the social links come into play from Persona. You're talking to characters that you'd like to, form better bonds with. You'll gain little gifts throughout the story, and so you could give those gifts to your classmates, especially if you think, well, this girl likes, this sort of thing, and I have this sort of thing. Maybe if I give it to her, we can progress to the next step of the social link. So that kind of moves the game along that way. It's really optional, but it's also at the same time recommended to do these social links because if you gain a certain progression through a character's social link, you'll gain an ability that can be used in the class trial portion of the game, which is important. I mean, whether it's increased stamina or increased focus or maybe make this part of the game a little bit easier. I mean, again, you can skip over it and not do any of this social link stuff, but it can really help if you're looking to do better in the class trial section. So that's all the before murder stuff, but after a murder takes place, it's deadly life. It's really essentially how every criminal investigation, a crime scene investigation takes place in a video game. You're talking to people, you're looking at things, you're trying to gain evidence in the form of truth bullets. And this is where Danganronpa Bullet Refute comes back, because these truth bullets will be your evidence that you'll have to fire in the class trials to nullify contradictions. So that all makes sense in that sense. We get to the class trial, and it's really like an Ace Attorney trial. And it's kind of hard to say or describe what's going on if you haven't played a game like Ace Attorney. But Joe, for you, I think it's the simplest parallel to make. You know, Ace Attorney's cases are driven by cross-examinations, right? I mean, there are all of the events that will, that kind of lead up to it. Characters are talking and there are revelations that occur, but the real showdowns are the cross-examinations in Ace Attorney. Danganronpa's class trials are powered by what are called non-stop debates. So the music pumps, it gets going, and there's a set conversation that flows around the room because all of the characters are in a circle facing each other. And so one person says, well, this is happening. Well, I disagree. And well, what about this? Oh, I didn't consider that. And so like the conversation's flowing around the room and the text is showing up on the screen as the music's pumping, as it's going, and certain words are highlighted in yellow. And this is where you have your evidence chamber that's full of truth bullets, depending on the difficulty of the game, because there are difficulty levels for both, the class trial and for the puzzles and whatnot. You can have, basically it's only a few at your disposal. So yeah, you could have all of your evidence, but for this specific cross-examination, non-stop debate, you only have a few to cycle through. And so you have to find the right bullet, use a cursor reticle, and fire the bullet at the contradicting word. And that's what allows you to move on. Now that's your objection, so to speak. Again, like that may sound really weird, but am I doing an okay job in describing how it's very similar to Ace Attorney?
I mean, so yeah, for the most part, that part, yes.
So for Ace Attorney, instead of objecting to a phrase that, appears on the screen, there's a phrase, but you have to fire the evidence at a specific highlighted word. So like that's the best I can explain it as. So while the first game really goes into contradictions and everything's about contradictions, Danganronpa 2 mixes it up by adding colored blue words instead of yellow. And these can be shot for agreement. This is not to point out contradiction, it's saying, I agree with that. And so it's a different way of thinking about how you're interacting with these nonstop debates. Now, granted, it's pretty clear when you have to do this. So they're at least on the easier difficulties. So it's pretty clear there. If you want some real fun, though, in Danganronpa V3, you get the option of lying and saying you can contradict something, but you can be a lying liar and change how the case is going. And that's up to you. I mean, granted, V3's case, they all ultimately end up at the same point, but it just may have different routes of getting there. So they try to add and sort of just make tweaks to this nonstop debate system for each game. There are also mini games in the class trials to kind of keep things fresh. There's Hangman's Gambit, there's Truth Blade, there's Spot Select, Logic Dive, Panic Talk Action. I think the most interesting one, though, is Closing Argument. And what happens here is Closing Argument always takes place at the end of a case, and you know everything that's going on but you have to reconstruct panels of a manga going right to left in how the case has played out. And it's just the coolest way to kind of summarize everything that's happened in the case. Some of these mini games, not great. Kind of a pain in the ass, actually. But it's a good way to kind of mix up the sort of pacing of the case, because Danganronpa is a pretty long game. I mean, some of the chapters, like there are 6 chapters essentially in each main installment, and they can be up to 5 hours long, based on all of the story events, the investigation, and then the actual, trials. Trials can be, 2 to 3 hours, depending on how quickly you read and piece things together. So yeah, you need to kind of break up the pacing overall. Danganronpa has a very unique visual style in that it's a pop art style and violence that's inspired by the Saw movie series, and it's really all its own when it's combined together. I mean, characters are drawn in a bold anime style. Blood is colored hot pink. One way to explain why that's the case is to avoid really severe ratings for the rating system, but also seeing hot pink blood kind of causes this unease, and it's unnatural, especially when there are these specially animated execution sequences at the end of the trials. Because the gist of it is, someone's looking to get off the island, that's why they murdered somebody, but they want to do so to trick their classmates at the end of each trial to vote for someone else as whodunit, who's the murderer. And of course, to move the story forward, the class generally decides, yep, you're the one who did it, actual murderer, so we can continue our peaceful lives on the island, the school, wherever. And as a result, Monokuma, being the cruel mastermind of the game that he is, delightfully and gleefully executes the one who's guilty of the murder. So it's just this very dynamic look with the hot pink blood and just this excessive violence. And that's Danganronpa. It's a really good dub cast, actually. I'm sure some people would be like, I only play with the Japanese voices, but the dub's actually really good. In Danganronpa 2 especially, you have Johnny Young Bosch as Hajime Hinata, your character. Pretty good anime protagonist voice. That's a good choice right there. You may have seen Nagito Komaeda in memes. He's certainly out there. And Chiaki Nanami is best girl in this game. That's just a fact. Can't argue with that one. Sorry, that's just the way it is. As far as the basic history of Danganronpa goes, the game was originally conceived as a basic visual novel, but as visual novels were growing less popular, new gameplay elements were added to make it stand out. Thus, the class trials and all of this stuff. The story was inspired, apparently, by the Sega Dreamcast survival horror game Illbleed. And yeah, there just really isn't anything like Danganronpa out there right now. The game was reviewed fairly well, with Metacritic averages in the low 80s, and it was certainly awarded more in Japan than it was recognized stateside, especially with 2 games in the series coming out in the same year in 2014. But it's also certainly a bigger deal in Japan. I mean, Monokuma is an icon there, for better or for worse, this half black, half white bear. Super Danganronpa 2 over there won Famitsu's Game of the Year Reader's Choice that year, while it also earned an award of excellence at the 2013 Japan Game Awards. But yeah, Monokuma's everywhere, and he is the face of that entire franchise. There are crossover appearances with other games that are big in Japan with Danganronpa, including appearances in Terraria, Conception 2, and even Crypt of the Necrodancer over in Japan, which features a range of Danganronpa music and character options for the game. So I found that really interesting. I'm not sure if that can be acquired stateside, but that's a big thing over there. Unfortunately, I think Danganronpa is kind of at its end right now, which is really weird to say. I feel like it's at this complete point. V3 ended at a really fitting point for the series, and the series' main writer is now working on other projects. It's a series that now, because there necessarily won't be any additions, I feel like it's a great time to get into it. It's one of the series that I wouldn't really mind if it never comes back, but at the same time, I would also be thrilled with a new installment. Now, I'm talking about all these things about how Danganronpa is this fusion of gameplay elements, and it has this really unique graphical style, but I think, more than anything else, the soundtrack is something you listen to and say, yep, that's Danganronpa's music. And that's responsible for Masafumi Takada. Masafumi Takada was born on August 2nd, 1970, in Inuyama, Aichi Prefecture in Japan. His associated instrument for playing is keyboards, and he learned on electric organ when he was 3.
That's 4.
Ding, 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 ding.
That's 4 of them.
That's another one. Specifically noting the Yamaha Electone being the specific model he learned on.
It's gotta just be a Japanese thing. It has to be.
I think it is. Yeah, we've talked about how American kids learn recorder. Japanese kids must have learned on electric organ.
I guess. That's such a weird one.
He also learned piano and, oddly enough, tuba after that in high school. I feel like that's a first for tuba.
I think you're right. I don't think we've gotten another mention of tuba in this show yet.
Tubumaboo? Obomabo? Saxophone. He studied music in Tokyo. He got his degree. He says he's inspired by Debussy in terms of classical music and really likes Ryuichi Sakamoto as far as composers overall. He entered the game industry around the time of the end of the Super Famicom. So it's this big sound transition from, the 16-bit classic bleeps and bloops to a bigger range of actual sounds that can be used. He founded his personal record label, Sound Prestige, in 2008, and he's formed 2 Kyo games with the writer and the artist of the Danganronpa series, as well as the writer/director of the Zero Escape series.
Oh, so this is just the Peter studio then.
This is the Peter studio. Like, this is all of my favorite things.
All that's missing is like a Persona writer and a real Pikachu.
Yeah. Throw in Shigenori Soejima, and then just add some Pokemon stuff in there. Like, I am really excited for their first project, Death March Club, which is planned for release in 2020. But yeah, it's like, this is another part of the reason why, like, Danganronpa's probably at an end. Zero Escape is probably at an end, because the real driving forces for the creation of the series is they're working on new things together with Takada, with the artist from Danganronpa. I'm so excited. I can't wait. Masafumi Takada has an interesting quote where he says, "I don't consider myself or want to become an artist. I want to be a craftsman," which is an interesting way of looking at things. And he also says, it's just as one of these, like, well, yeah, duh sort of quotes, but it's just good to enforce with, like, the importance of game music. He says, quote, "When games are built from the beginning, they're made without sound. And when you add the music and sound, you're giving life to the game." And I can't imagine the Danganronpa series without the music of Masafumi Takada. But what other games has Takada breathed life into? Masafumi Takada, of course, worked on all of the Danganronpa series, but he's also worked a lot with Goichi Suda, or Suda51, as you may know him, for the games The Silver Case, Killer 7, which is one of Takada's favorite projects, and also No More Heroes. So if you're thinking of, like, the No More Heroes soundtrack, like, yeah, that's a pretty good approximation to what you're getting with Danganronpa. He's also worked on games like God Hand, Resident Evil, The Umbrella Chronicles, Vanquish, The Evil Within, and, like, the entire Earth Defense Force series. We also like to mix in, like, how they've contributed to Smash Brothers. Masafumi Takada contributed to a remix of Tomodachi Life's Afternoon on the Island in Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. And of course, as we just mentioned, he contributed to Kid Icarus Uprising. So yeah, it's quite the list of games. And yeah, you're gonna get this really distinct style that's all Masafumi Takada, and crank it up another notch and like, yep, that's Danganronpa. Because Danganronpa music is all about being punchy. And like this is really derived from the original project pitch. When Takada was talking about writing the main Danganronpa theme, he says, quote, "I didn't have any time because I was busy with another project, so I just banged it out in 20 or 30 minutes. Afterwards, as I was cleaning up the arrangement, I had my Max robot voice say, Danganronpa, and I gave myself goosebumps. I can still feel them to this day." And yeah, if you hear that theme and it's like, why is that computer voice saying Danganronpa? I mean, that's why. There's even a marimba section in the main theme, which is, I guess, an homage to Takada's work on the Silver Case that the Danganronpa writer Kazutaka Kodaka liked a whole lot. And say, I just add that in the music. Oh, okay. All right. Takada says that music, in a way, it actually comes pretty simply to him as far as composition. He says, when I see a plot outline and designs, I can hear the music in my head. So all I have to do is make it real. I mean, yeah, it makes it sound very easy. I wish I could do that.
I wish it was that easy. Come on, man.
Guess it just comes that naturally to him. When it comes to writing music for the Monokuma character, he thinks of, quote, psychopop shenanigans and lurking death. Something like, we're all gonna die sooner or later, cha-cha-cha.
It's like something I would say.
And Monokuma, like, we talk about like his look and how he's so iconic, but he definitely has that vibe. Like, he's just a creepy, crazy, animatronic, remotely controlled bear that, yeah, has this delightful glee with murder. So I feel like that's really fitting for the music. Apparently, Takada takes an annual vacation to Hawaii, which certainly sounds a lot easier if you're in Japan and it's just like a little jump there in a way. But in that sense, because of that experience, it was really easy for him to match the tropical island feel of the second game here with Danganronpa 2. And while the original Danganronpa's tunes were very claustrophobic, in a sense to match the school setting that these characters are locked in, you're on a tropical island, you have an open air feel, and so that makes sense for Danganronpa 2's tunes. But yeah, it's a music that's all its own. Heavy beats, you have experimenting with synth, it's hyper poppy and punchy, and I feel like as we get into the 5 critical tracks here, there is no song that exemplifies this more to start than Miss Monomi's Practice Lesson. So Joe, you may be listening to this, and there may have been some research beforehand, but that's pretty unlike anything you've ever heard in a game before, right?
I can't really say it's not. Yeah,
yeah. It's definitely different and out there. It's just a happy and bouncy theme. It's titled in Japanese, like these titles on the soundtrack, they have Japanese names, and it's just the American localized, translated over, but it's Monomi Sensei no Kyoiku Jishu for the title. Yeah, this is Monomi's theme, and Monomi is a pink and white rabbit that's all about love, which is in stark contrast to her evil bear brother. Apparently, the computerized voice in there is actually spelling out Monomi. So you wouldn't be able to tell because of the kind of warping it goes through. But yeah, it's this theme you're kind of hit with pretty early in the game because Monomi is the teacher of all of these students. Yeah, go figure. All these students are led by this rabbit, and whenever she's talking, whenever events with her take place, this theme comes in, and yeah, it's pretty different. It's out there, but it's also very catchy. And it's like, yep, that's definitely Danganronpa.
The closest I can think of for something that sounds similar to this, and even then it's not quite there, is The World Ends With You, I think.
Yeah.
It has a very similar feel to something I'd hear in that game.
And I feel like that's a good approximation. The World Ends With You is certainly more vocals overall. But as far as the kind of punchy energy, I think that's a pretty good approximation. Number 2 on the critical tracks here, let's go with Beautiful Ruin, Somersault. Boy, if you didn't know this game took place on a tropical island, you sure do now. This is the overworld music that plays when you're exploring the first island. It eventually expands out into 5 different islands. But yeah, here on the first island, things aren't too bad. Yet. There hasn't been any murders. But really, it's the definite tropical vibe of the game. It's still accented with these strong beats and synth to really make it a Danganronpa-like song. But yeah, all these, whether steel drums or marimbas or things like that, you have that tropical feel. And for story reasons, there are certain songs on the soundtrack that are either in 8 or 16-bit versions, and this is one that gets a 16-bit remake. And I think it's just the coolest when games officially do this, whether it's for story reasons, like also in Nier Automata, or just as a remake or remix in general. It's just the coolest. I really like this song a whole lot. It's really iconic to at least the early part of Danganronpa 2. Yeah, catchy, good vibes with the song.
It's certainly tropical.
It sure is. But we're now going to get into the kind of meatier portion of the soundtrack. And to get into a Class Trial song specifically, let's go with Class Trial Odd Edition. Ooh, this one punches you right in the face. It's so good. I love the song a whole lot. It's Gakkyu Saiban Ikehen for the Japanese title. Imagine, again, I'm going to make it an Ace Attorney comparison. Imagine if a theme like this played when an Ace Attorney prosecutor had just this drastic case-shifting objection. Like, someone's raising a point that you didn't consider, and if for Danganronpa's case, you're going to probably have to fight it off with one of these trial mini-games. But, man, right at the get-go, it punches you square in the face, and it blares at you. It's on. Let's go. I just get chills every time listening to this song.
This is another one where I can definitely hear, this is a World Ends With You song without lyrics.
Yeah.
Those two games seem to have very similar feels overall, and they're both weird soundtracks, so that makes sense.
Weird soundtrack, weird games, actually kind of pretty similar art styles, come to think of it. That's a
little bit.
I had never considered that before. That's a really good comparison. But yeah, you have a lot of Class Trial songs. This one stands out as just a good objection in your face. Let's go, showdown time kind of tune. But when you get back to investigating a murder and checking out the crime scene, especially later in the game, we have to go with Kill Command.
I feel like I've heard the title of this song before somewhere, but I don't think I've ever heard the song.
It's interesting because oftentimes it's paired with the Japanese title of Ekoroshia. Kill Command, even then, sometimes like Final Kill Command, last, because we're talking like endgame stuff here. The investigation theme that this is, it's really built in 3 stages over the course of the game, and the guitar in this track is played by Jun Fukuda, who is a frequent collaborator with Masafumi Takada. I mean, them riffs, though, it's so good, and then it continues into the electric piano. There's a lot of energy right at the gate, but then you get into this groove. Again, like, just imagining, like, an Ace Attorney game investigating a crime scene to this music. Like, it just takes it up a notch.
Yeah, that is fitting description, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Making me really want to load this game up, but I don't have time this week.
Oh, you got to. I'm going to bug you and make sure you play this game when you do have time. With Kill Command here, like, you're definitely feeling the urgency to find these last bits of evidence. I mean, because with these late game cases, the stakes are raised big time. And so, yeah, really, really powerful energy with this investigation track. But then it all comes down to the final showdown, the 5th of the 5 critical tracks. We're talking Discussion, Hope versus Despair. And woo-wee! Man, if you want to talk about energy and just overall a frenetic pace with a song, we're talking about, in the Japanese title, Giron, Hope versus Despair. There are 3 levels of discussion tracks. There's break, there's heat up. This one kind of combines the best of both together, and Hope versus Despair, it's the make or break end of case type showdown. It's, in a way, it's like the Pressing Pursuit sort of tune for Ace Attorney. Like, this is it. Like, big final showdown here. And really, like, the whole track is worth listening to. It just goes places. I mean, granted, the clip here, like, it goes into like full on rave at this point. But just imagine the pressure of you're studying these spoken testimonies to find weak points, to shoot with the evidence in your truth bullet chamber. And this is pumping. It's so good. It's like Ace Attorney on drugs. It's just cranked way, way, way up. And if you think about it, the narrative theme of like the entire Danganronpa series in a nutshell is hope versus despair. Like, the idea of just these two feelings, these two opposing thoughts clashing, like, that's Danganronpa in honestly a nutshell. But this song is just so hype. It's the best. I love it, and it's perfect for this kind of tune.
I mean, it's got, I think energy's the right word.
Yeah.
For this, because I don't have a lot to add about these, because most of these songs, like, the lead up to this episode is the first time I've heard any of these songs. Because eventually I will play. I own 1 and 2 on Steam and have for, like I said, over a year, and I've had the first one installed for about that long. I just haven't loaded it up.
I think this is a good taste, though, of what is in store for you. And for anyone that is curious about trying Danganronpa out there, these tracks specifically in the Critical 5 are really catered towards 2, because obviously we're talking about Danganronpa 2. But yeah, so we're focusing on that game. But on the cutting room floor here, I want to focus on a couple tracks that kind of carry over from the first game. And so we'll start with Danganronpa Second Gig. So this is the main theme of the series. You kind of hear that computerized Danganronpa. You have the main melody riff it's really played up with the electric guitar. You get the heavier drum beats. And these are certainly improvements over, I think, the first game's version of the theme. You also get these haunting vocals in there. And it's just a good way to kind of flesh out the piece. Definitely like this one a whole lot. It had to be here in some capacity because it's the main theme. It's what players of Danganronpa think of basically immediately. And then the second one is RE New World Order. This is the best theme for the best girl, and I'm going to keep it at that for spoilers' sake. It was like the biggest smile on my face when this theme returned in this game. It was just perfect timing. It hit all the right moments. A lot of songs from Danganronpa 1 return into the second game, and they're kind of notified with RE, like referring to or responding to at the beginning of their title. So definitely a lot of returning tracks, but I really wanted to focus on the Critical 5 for ones that are for this game. And when I think about it, of all the Ace Attorney kind of comparisons I've been making, like, yeah, this is probably the most Ace Attorney-like track.
It reminds me of an investigation theme from an Ace Attorney game. Mostly one of the later ones, like one of the 3DS ones.
And yeah, I feel like that is very, very fitting. So what will I never forget about Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair? When it comes to Danganronpa as a whole, and it is sad because like I don't think we're really ever going to get another one, but I feel like I will miss the feeling, or at least I'll never forget it, of just how overwhelmed you are at the start of the game when 16 characters are being thrown at you. And you feel like I'm never going to learn these names, these faces, these ultimate abilities. Like, how am I ever going to learn this? And yet you do. You learn each and every one so well. And then it just hurts so much when they're ripped away from you. And someone else in the class did it. It's just this really interesting dynamic at play with characters that you grow really attached to. Like, say, oh yeah, there's this one girl I'm sweet on. I'm going to build up that social link with her. What do you mean she just got murdered? Like, it's a feeling that's just, it's pretty unique to Danganronpa, and I'm not going to forget that. There are certain ones that really still sting. But I think Danganronpa 2 in particular is really important because it established the overarching lore and canon. You could have just taken the first game and be like, yep, that's a one-off game, one-off events. Yep, that sure is a game. And this sequel is like, no, we're going to make it a whole canon chronology series, like tie everything together. It's all connected. And I feel like that makes it really important and special. So we've talked about our two games quite enough today, I think, but good to get an all-star team on Kid Icarus Uprising, and then one of those all-stars, he's had quite the career on his own. And I don't know if he can compare, Pit and Danganronpa in really any other terms, but two great games, two fantastic soundtracks, and I'm glad you all joined us here today to listen. So that will do it for this episode of Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at The Dobaga. The video version of the show is over on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, also at rhymeswithasia.com, but it's that MP3 podcast version you want. That's over on Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. Get those MP3 podcasts on podcast storefronts around the globe. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, take them in your car, at work, on a run, wherever. Just put that into your ears. We'll get that Patreon going soon. We got some episodes to line up and maybe release early when they're done, certainly. And also that Spotify playlist. I mean, hopefully you guys are checking that out because Joe worked really hard to pull that together and keep it updated with all these new songs. So we can't be on Spotify with the podcast per se, but all of the songs that are available on Spotify, we're just going to infuse them into that Original Soundchat playlist.
In terms of this week, I believe Danganronpa is the only one that's on. I believe V2 is on Spotify, so this one will at least be added to the playlist.
Ooh, I hope so. It's a good soundtrack. But the social media for the show overall is at Soundchat OST, so you can leave your feedback for the show there. What can we improve on? What do you like about the show? Any suggestions for games that you'd like us to cover? We'll take all considerations there. Joe, what are we talking about next time? Who are you talking about?
I'm going to cover Pascal Michael Stifle.
I will be covering Michiru Yamane. So, what could those games be? Certainly very interesting. I'll play you guys out here. We talked about Ikarushia, and this is, of course, a fan cover and all that. But on YouTube, Ferdk, F-E-R-D-K, Ferdik, did a metal cover of Ikarushia or Kill Command. I hope you enjoy that. Thanks so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. Take care.